If you've been intrigued by what you've been seeing on this channel and are considering moving to Saipan, if you'd like a sunnier, simpler, slower lifestyle while still being part of the US, then start with the Saipan Living Relocation Guide, an A to Z reference of everything you'll need to adjust to life here on Saipan, Tinian, or Rota. Order here on YouTube, on Amazon, or at saipanliving.com. Then consider a phone or Zoom consultation where you can ask any question at all to plan your move to Saipan. Then when you're ready to take the leap, you can sign up for a reconnaissance tour before you move, or a relocation tour, visit different neighborhoods, see what life is like, get your paperwork in order, your PO box, your ID, so you can hit the ground running. As a bonus, if you sign up for any tour or consultation, you'll get a copy of the Fast Track Kit that has all the forms and documents and applications you need to start your residency. My name is Walt Goodridge. Let's make your move to Saipan simple, fast, and stress-free. If you've been... Our volume is up. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for joining in. Okay, everything looks good on my end. Hope you guys are hearing me. Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Walt Goodridge, and I'm coming to you live from Saipan. And the purpose of our live stream is to answer your questions about life on Saipan. We have a lot of interest from people who are interested in or considering relocating. So I'm here to answer any questions you might have. So give you a little bit of background. My name is Walt. I'm originally from Jamaica, West Indies. I moved to Saipan several years ago. I stopped counting now, so I don't want to be reminded of how long it's been. But I've enjoyed myself immensely being here. I've been welcomed, and I've written books about Saipan. I've done workshops here. I do tours here as well, and I have this YouTube channel. So if you have any questions at all about Saipan, feel free to ask anything at all. As I tell people during my tours, you can feel free to ask any question at all you like. I cannot be offended or embarrassed, and it's better to ask the question than to wonder, than to have regrets about what you should have asked before you got here. So feel free to ask any question at all. I will say, however, that there are certain topics that I may not wish to discuss here on YouTube, but if it's a question that you'd like an answer to, you can always email me at walt@discoversaipan.com, or you can go to the discoversaipan.com website and put in a request there as well. You can go to discoversaipan.com/relocation. Okay, so you're quite welcome, Inspire One Light. So I'll answer your question first. Thanks for joining in. Okay, so does Saipan have AAA roadside service? If not, is there an alternative? And which biz has a good buzz? Okay, so I do not believe, I've never actually been a AAA member, Automobile Association of America, and from what I understand, they provide roadside assistance. So if you're ever broken down anywhere in the US, you can, and I think there was Canada as well, if I'm not mistaken. You can call up and they'll come and fix your car, tow you, do whatever is needed to get you back on the road. So I don't believe that there is an office here on Saipan. Your best bet, or Guam, your best bet would be to contact AAA directly and ask them if they have satellite offices here, or if there are third-party vendors, maybe car rental companies, maybe gas stations, maybe tow truck companies that will act on their behalf here. So that could be an option as well, if AAA doesn't actually have an office here. But that's a very good question. I'll look into it further. But at present, from the little research that I've done, there are no offices on Saipan or Guam. That doesn't mean the service is not available. Just may mean that they have a third party. Maybe they've contracted out that service to someone on those islands. So you might want to look into that. However, one of the things that I've found about life on Saipan, you're essentially living in a small town in the middle of the Pacific. And as a result, the community tends to be a little tighter. People tend to be very giving and helpful. And even if you're a hermit and a recluse like me, if you unfortunately stopped out on the road, I'm sure there'll be people who notice that you're in distress and offer to help. I've had that happen several times. One in particular, I remember I was doing a tour with a fellow here on Saipan, and I made the one time that I didn't get a four-wheel drive vehicle, or the car rental company didn't have one. We ended up pulling off the road in an area so that we could look at a particular site, but then there was too much sand and grass on that area, so we couldn't make it out. And after trying for a little while, someone came up and just said, "Hey, you need any help?" And they offered to help, and eventually we had to call the car rental company to come pull us out. But the point is that it's unlikely that you'll be stranded on the road anywhere for any length of time without somebody offering assistance, without a police car coming by, without someone in the community helping out. So it's not something that I worry about myself. In fact, when I leave my home and I go do my errands, I never take my phone with me, my smartphone. I leave it at home, and people have asked me, "What if you break down on the road?" And I'm pretty confident that someone will stop to to help me. So, but if you're not willing to take that chance, then at least make sure you have the number of at least one person or a mechanic whom you can call in case of an emergency. But again, it's a small island. Um, the only places where you might be so far remote that that no one is driving by, in those areas you probably won't have cell phone service anyway, so you'll have to walk to some civilization in order for you to avail that service. But generally, no, I don't worry about it. And uh, while there is not an official AAA office here, I don't think it'll be a major issue given the personality of the community. All right, thanks for that question. But I will look into it a little bit more, and I'll see if, or you can do it yourself. You call up AAA and ask if they have any satellite offices in Guam, in the territories, Guam, Hawaii, Virgin Islands, that sort of thing. All right, thanks for that. Question. I know that you and many other transplants to Saipan rent housing, but for those of us who might want to lease or even build a home on the island, are construction tradespeople hard or easy to locate? Thanks for asking that question. There's an aspect of that, the land ownership, that I'm going to get into later on, which you'll find really fascinating. But at present, tradespeople are a little difficult to come by simply because most of the tradespeople are contract workers, typically Filipino contract workers who over the course of the last few years have been, the population of which has been dwindling a bit. So it's a little harder to get tradespeople to work on projects. I know, for example, my landlord, when she needs a plumber, for example, she actually has to wait. There's a fellow who she uses, but she has to wait till he's off from work. So typically he can only perform on Saturdays or Sundays because the demand for his expertise is so great that he has multiple jobs and multiple commitments that he has to go to. So it could be an issue. However, if you go through a temp agency here on the island, you might be able to find tradespeople who are available. All right, so thanks for that question. Okay. Okay, just thanks. Late but happy to share, to catch you live. Thank you for sharing your advice, experience, and adventures. You're quite welcome, Melinda. Okay, and Inspire One Light says about the kind helpfulness of small town island family, even for recluses. Thanks for the answers. No problem. Yep, call AAA and find out. All right. Is there garbage pickup on island? Melinda asked, yes, absolutely there is garbage pickup on the island. There are at least, I think, 3 companies. 2 I know for sure, and I think there's a third. And they will equip you with a huge container or a container based on the size, and it could be anywhere from $35, $50, $100 a month or so, I think, to get garbage pickup. But if you're living in a um, rental property, if you're living like I am in an apartment, then that service would be provided as part of your rental by the landlord. But yes, there is garbage pickup on the island. There are places that don't have garbage pickup. For example, I'm almost sure that Tinian does not have garbage pickup. So you would have to take your refuse to the dump on Tinian. So I'm pretty sure that that's the way that works there. There might be people who you can contract out to do it independently for you if you're not able to drop it off yourself. But I don't think there is an official garbage pickup service on Tinian. All right. Good to know. Thanks for asking that. Okay. Um, Uh, stop doing that. Ask. My wife is asking how bad the mosquitoes are there. I answered this question last week. I think perhaps initially when you and your wife come here, or maybe she's coming alone, that you might represent a new source of food for the mosquitoes here. So I've heard over the years that some people, when they first get here, the mosquitoes might be an issue. And that's in my speculation is because the mosquitoes recognize a new food source, a fresh new buffet has landed on the island, so they are intrigued by that. But over time, I don't think it'll be an issue as you get acclimated to the island. I don't find that it's an issue. Maybe it's my tropical blood that they're used to, but usually anywhere you live is going to have screen doors and screen windows, so it won't be an issue indoors. And outdoors, not many people, I've heard some complaints, but I think that might be a function of their diet and maybe even their blood type. But it really varies because I don't have an issue necessarily. I know many people who don't, uh, but I have heard complaints about it. It's the sort of thing you may not know the right answer to until you come and do a reconnaissance mission for yourself. It might tend to be more of an issue if you live near a body of water, if you live near maybe Lake Susupi, or if you're near the bush somewhere during the rainy season, it could present an issue because the stagnant water attracts the mosquito egg layers. But generally, I don't think it's a major issue. All right. But that is just my opinion. Okay, now let me answer some of the other questions that have accumulated over the last week. Okay, how do you, Bulldog One, NDD Bulldog One asked, how do you go about finding unadvertised living quarters? Okay, good question. And the question is asking, once you land here on Saipan, if the real estate companies, agents are not handling smaller rentals, or if they're not handling homes and people who are renting out rooms or sections of homes, how do you find unadvertised living quarters? Now, a couple ways you can do that. One is you can go on Facebook and look up the Saipan buy and sell, or Saipan real estate, or Saipan apartments, and you'll find some groups you can join and people will list their apartments there. That's one. Two, and this is the method I found to be most effective and the one that I use when I do my relocation tours or my reconnaissance tours here, we simply drive around in the island, during which I'll be pointing out the pros and cons of a particular neighborhood. And if we see an apartment building, we'll stop. There'll usually be a sign outside in front of the apartment complex that has the contact information. Some of the signs may actually say rooms available right now. Many times you'll drive around apartments and you'll see for rent signs in the windows of those apartments. If there are none, then what I've done in the past is knocked on people's doors and simply ask. People tend to be very friendly for the most part, and they'll ask, "Hi, I'm looking for an apartment. Is the landlord available, or can you give me the contact number for the landlord?" And people are usually quite happy to do that, and that's how you end up texting or phoning to find out if there's availability. But other than that, you can check real estate agents. They tend to manage the properties that are a little higher end. So if you are looking for gated communities, if you are looking for something on the higher end, there are certain companies you can go to here that will deal with those. So there are several different channels you can use to get unadvertised properties. Hope that's helpful. Okay. Okay, possibly a sensitive topic. I've never met a bed bug and I don't want to, and I'm allergic to pesticides. What's the bed bug situation in apartments? I have no idea. All of the apartments I've lived in, and I've lived in one, two, three, four, five over the years, never had that issue. Um, the only issue I've had, and everyone has this, is an occasional gecko walking through. There'll be some places may have termite issues, but that you can typically spot ahead of time. But if you're living in a mostly concrete apartment building, that's not usually an issue. The termite issue usually comes up when you're renting a house or leasing a house. Um, but bed bugs can't answer that. But in the apartments I've lived in over the years, it has never been an issue. Landlords tend to be conscientious about that because they'll get a bad reputation otherwise. All right. Is there a source for locally raised? Melinda Hodge asked, is there a source for locally raised meat, dairy, and eggs? How does your carnivore friend find the food he or she needs? The food supply here is not an issue. You can get meat from the US. Many of the stores and the larger stores actually get their stock, their inventory from the US mainland. So you'll go into a store here on Saipan and you'll see American apples, you'll see US oranges, you'll see all many 99% of all the fruits you can get on the mainland, you can get here on Saipan. Then locally, there is a farmer's market that's every Saturday morning, Sabalo Market. Sabalo is the Chamorro word for Saturday, and that's where I shop and I get fruits and vegetables there as well. I tend to eat locally as much as possible. But local meat, yes, there are people who raise cattle. A friend of mine actually has a piggery, so you can get um, beef and pork and chickens and eggs as well locally. But unfortunately, most people are buying those items imported from the US or from Korea or even from Japan. But I don't think it'll be an issue with you getting meat if that's what you're into. Okay, great questions. Okay, let me um, there is one aspect about living on Saipan that is really interesting. It's going to take a little while to get into. So let me ask any other questions. Let me answer any other questions before I move on. Okay, great. Now, here on Saipan, you and I cannot own land. Um, by that I mean you and I, as people who are not of Northern Marianas descent. If you're watching this and you're a Chamorro Carolinian of Northern Marianas descent, then you're one of the fortunate ones who can own land free and clear here on Saipan. Others of us cannot. We can only lease it for 55 years. That's because there is a constitution that governs law and life here on Saipan, and Article 12 of that constitution limits land ownership or interest in real property to people of Northern Marianas descent. So that brings up an interesting question that often comes up during life here is whether Article 12 should be repealed and uh, should it be allowed that people who are not of Northern Marianas descent can actually purchase and sell property. Now, before or you can form your opinion on that for a second. Let me know. Do you think that Article 12 should be repealed and everyone should be able to purchase land? Um, or should it stay the way it is? Now, I'll tell you both sides of the argument. There are people who believe that restricting land ownership to people of Northern Marianas descent is limiting investment on the island. There are people who believe that if a hotel or some other conglomerate wanted to really put money into the Saipan economy, that the fact that they can't own the land free and clear is a deterrent to that activity. And there are other people who believe that it's not. It has not been. The Hyatt has been here. The Nico Hotel has been here. Crown Plaza. There are many hotels and restaurants and entrepreneurial ventures that have been launched over the years, and they've either leased property from the local landowner or they've leased it through the government, through public land, through the government. So there are people who believe that it's um, preventing economic development, and there are people like myself who believe that it has not in the past. But again, I have no horse in the race, no dog in the fight, so I'm just an observer from the outside. Um, so the question, though, is that people sometimes tend not to ask is what happens if Article 12 is repealed? And I remember reading an article years ago in the Saipan Tribune that went into detail about um, what would eventually happen if Article 12 were repealed and people, foreigners and investors not of non-Northern Marianas descent were allowed to own property. And one of the ultimate consequences of repealing Article 12, and some people don't think about this, is that ultimately, maybe over 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, ultimately the government would be forced to impose property taxes. All right? So right now on Saipan, there's no sales tax, there's no property tax, there are no parking meters. That's one of the things I like about the island. But that means that the sources of revenue for the government are limited in that regard. So where you live, if you live on the mainland, if you live in Hawaii or Guam, land is a commodity. All right. It is something that has value that can be assessed and officially evaluated. Whereas here on Saipan, land is more of a cultural asset, meaning it's passed as part of the cultural heritage from families to one generation to the next. And even though you and I may recognize value in it, and though people can speculate as to the value, and people can offer $1 million to lease beachfront property, there is no official valuation that goes on because it's not a commodity. All right. And as a result, again, in Guam and in the mainland, it's a commodity that can be traded on an open market, whereas here on Saipan, it's a restricted market because the land can only be sold uh, from one NMD to another NMD, person of Northern Marianas descent. However, if you now allow foreigners to purchase the property, you've now changed the basic structure of land here, and you've now made it a commodity that will now respond to the open market, and prices are absolutely going to go up, and people will sell their property in order to make a lot of money. But then what will then tend to happen is that people will develop the land, and there may become more of a strain on the infrastructure of the island. Now, in the past, when those demands came about, the government didn't really have an incentive nor the means to finance those infrastructure improvements. So that would be incumbent on the the person leasing it, or the local landowner to fix up the land or to the surrounding roads or that sort of thing. However, and one other thing that's really important is that banks, because there's no set way of valuing the land that's recognized across industries, like in the banking industry, banks would not give loans, would rarely give loans. There are certain circumstances where that could happen, but banks, you couldn't use your land as collateral for a loan, because the bank, let's say you default on a loan on the mainland, the bank can then seize the land um, and sell it, to make back their money for the loan that you defaulted. But here, the bank cannot do that because the bank is not of Northern Marianas descent. So the bank cannot have a legal interest in the property, whether it's a lien or reselling it, nor can they sell it to someone who's not of Northern Marianas descent. So the banks don't get involved with that. But once you now make it part of the open market, banks can get involved, loans can be issued, the prices go up, and a couple of things start to happen. The infrastructure demands may increase, will likely increase, and then the government has now the incentive and the means to generate money to support that infrastructure or to improve the infrastructure. And where does that money come from? That money would come from imposing property taxes on the local land. They can do that because now the local land can be assessed in a recognizable way to say that it has X value. The banks will recognize it, and therefore the banks can say, okay, this property has X value that may change over time, but we know we have a benchmark, we have a milestone benchmark for what the land is worth, and the government can now impose property taxes. And once that happens, that's when the issue becomes a little dire. Because if you think about it now, the average or every landowner in Saipan does not have to worry about property taxes. They can get up in the morning, they can live off their land, they can go to bed at night, never have to worry about property taxes. They own it, they can pass it on to their children, to their heirs, to assign it to anyone they want, as long as it's of Northern Marianas, the person is of Northern Marianas descent, they never have to worry. However, if tomorrow they're required to pay property tax, and if now the banks can seize the government through the banks can seize the property, for failure to pay those property taxes, then you're going to have people who are displaced off their land. And that happened in Guam, that happens in Hawaii. So that is the issue that many people don't think long term about, is that the people who are now do not have the financial means to pay property tax. If property tax becomes a thing, then they are either going to sell their land and move into an apartment somewhere, or they will either sell their land, or they're going to lose their land. It's going to be taken. So you'll get displacement of the local population, and you'll have more rich people and more foreigners and investors and conglomerates owning the land, and then the entire personality of the island will change. So whereas Saipan represents a paradise for you now to come here and get an apartment for $300, $400, $500, rent an entire house for $500, that would no longer be the case, because property taxes and everything else is going to raise the standard of living. So this little getaway in the middle of the Pacific that you're thinking of escaping to will no longer be the paradise in that regard, in terms of its affordability, that it currently is. All right. So that's a long discussion, but wanted to let you know about that. Now, I never knew this before I came to Saipan. I wasn't aware, but for me, I was not interested in buying property. I wasn't interested in being the no of a nomad. My nomad proclivities precluded me from investigating the real estate situation here. But for me, it hasn't been a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker for businesses over the years since the island opened up in the 70s. It hasn't been a deal breaker. Uh, as one fellow said to me, if you can't make a profit on your business in 55 years, then maybe should reconsider your business plan. But that's something to really consider, and it's a discussion that you'll probably get into if and when you move to Saipan in term the Article 12 situation. So interesting situation. If you have more questions about that, let me know. But let me see if I can show you something here that might put it into a little bit of perspective. All right, let's see what we have here. All right, so if Article 12 is repealed, then there will be market effects, the rising land values and speculation, and people willing to pay millions of dollars for beachfront property, and they'll be tempting for the local population, and people will sell their property. The fiscal pressure, because of the increased demands for infrastructure, may lead to insufficient revenues. Because again, right now, the government is only supported by the BGRT, Business Gross Revenue Tax, that the businesses are paying, businesses, including myself. And as a result, they're now going to have to move to taxation. And property taxes is the easiest and the most practical means of generating income to build infrastructure, because now the land is a commodity that you can place specific value on. And then once you implement something like property taxes, you cannot go back. It then becomes a permanent fixture in the nature of the island. All right. So if you like that graphic, I'll put a link to it in the description of the video. But that's in a nutshell what the Article 12 situation is. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's move to some questions. Is there a source of, okay, no, stop doing that. Ask, does Santa visit your island? Yes. Is Christmas something celebrated as much as it is in the States? Absolutely. Keep in mind that I would say 90% of the population is Catholic. 90%, we remember we have a lot of Filipinos, and we have Chamorros, who are both coming from a Spanish colonial history. So Catholicism is very big here. And celebrating Christmas. In fact, immediately after Halloween, October 31st, you start to hear Christmas music here in the stores on Saipan, and people buy trees, and we even have a Santa who will visit stores, and I'll do a video on that to let you know. A local mainland resident, um, who used to be a principal here, is often the Santa at the Joten store. All right, so yes, we do have Christmas is a big thing here. Um, uh, okay. Inspire One Light asks again, if you live in an apartment in Chalankanoa with 4 blocks of beach, about how many blocks away is the Saturday market? I'm into fresh fruits and veggies and may or may not have a car there. Okay. Fortunately for you, we do now have a limited bus service, CNMI Transit, that does service all along Beach Road. And if you look on a map, Beach Road runs from Garapan all the way through several villages, through to Chalankanoa, all the way to the south end of the island, and then it swings around and comes back again. So if you live anywhere along there that is convenient. You could walk out to the main road and take a bus there to the Sabalo market. So that's one. However, it is within walking distance. For example, one of the reasons I like this area, Chalankanoa or Susupi, is that it's in walking distance to a restaurant, to the post office, to the library, to the supermarket, to the Sabalo market. So it for years I actually did not have a car. I just did a lot of walking. So it is doable to live close enough to Sabalo Market that you can walk on the weekend. So car is not absolutely necessary. You could, because we do have some taxi services here, relatively cheap, you can also avail yourself of those services as well once a week to do your shopping. So that's a possibility. All right. Um, but to answer your question specifically, from where I live, or let's say if you okay, if you look on a map, look on Google Maps and look for maybe Mount Carmel Church, look for Shirley's Restaurant, look for World Resort Hotel. Those are all areas. Look for where the post office is. Those the main post office. Those are all in an area called Chalankanoa slash Susupi. And from there, the Savalo market is no more than 5 blocks from there, if you'd like to get specific. Okay. David Parker says Article 12 appears to keep things simpler and less subject to foreign influence. Absolutely. And it does, I mean, a point could be made, a case could be made to say that it does slow down development to a certain degree. But don't fall into the trap of believing that the word development is automatically a good thing. All right. One of the things I like about Saipan is some of the slower pace and the fact that the island has essentially not changed since I came here. I'll just say very many years, a whole generation ago. All right. Is there a bowling alley? Rudolph Rob Sell wants to know. Yes, there is a bowling alley. I've actually never been, but I know people who do, and I think they're still open. I know there were two, one in Garapan and one in uh, just above Olei, and I think they're still. I think at least one of them is still open. But yes, bowling is a thing here. Um, uh, so yeah, so that's I would agree with you as well. Or bowling alley. Yes, there is a bowling alley. Okay, stop doing that. Ask. Wife wants to know if you still have a Kmart and where is your Christmas tree? We never had a Kmart here on Saipan. If we did, maybe it was before my time. But I came in the mid 2000s and there wasn't a Kmart here. You might be thinking about the Kmart on Guam, which is one of 3 locations that still exist. Most of the other locations across the U.S. have closed, but there are still 3 that exist, and one of them is on Guam. And before the restructuring and the bankruptcy filing and whatever, the Kmart on Guam was the busiest and the biggest in the whole Kmart empire. But no, we never had a Kmart here. What we did have, and what we do have, is when I came, it was called Price Costco. So similar to a Costco, they had Kirkland. They have Kirkland products, and you can buy lots of things in bulk. No membership is needed. Our community is too small to support membership, so everyone you can just walk in and buy things in bulk if you're so inclined. And now it's called Joten Superstore, but when I first got here, it was called Price Costco. So the closest thing we have to that sort of large store is the Joten Superstore. And I've taken many guests there. And as I said, they still stock Kirkland products, even though technically the name is no longer Costco. So, oh, and then where is your Christmas tree? No, ma'am, there is not going to be a Christmas tree in my apartment. Um, hmm. I don't think I'll get into the reasons where I'm smarter than that. I like to think, but no, you're not going to see a Christmas tree. If you want to ask me a different question, a more specific question, free. But I'll answer the question you asked. There will be no Christmas tree in my apartment. All right. Okay. Great. 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 All right. Mark Lundgren retracted his message. Now that makes me curious. I wonder what you're about to ask, Mark. Um, quality olives available there? David Parker wants to know. Quality olives. I imagine so. I don't know what a quality olive is, but I've seen olives in jars, I've seen olives in cans. You can get olive oil here from the Costco or from the local supermarket. I tend to favor virgin, cold pressed virgin coconut, olive oil. So all of that is doable. But the olives themselves, I think I've seen bottled. Uh, so let me know if you have a more specific question. Olive oil, yes. So olive oil is available here. Absolutely. All right. Several larger apartment complexes in Garapan advertise on Facebook Marketplace. Would you expect these areas to be noisy? These days, not so much. But speaking of noise, couple of things that I, also being a person who likes to avoid noise, would be um, vigilant of when I'm looking around for an apartment. So here are a couple of them. One is roosters crowing. There are some people who are raising roosters here, and if you're not careful, you might end up next to someone who has a whole set of roosters that don't seem to follow a particular time clock, so they're crowing all hours of the day. So that's one. Bush cutters. There was one apartment complex that I took a client to, and the thing that stood out to me is that even though it was well manicured and there was a lot of hedges and beautiful flowers and bougainvilleas and all sorts of things, what struck me is that there would probably be an inordinate amount of bush cutting that happens around that particular apartment complex. So for me, that wouldn't be one that I would choose. And noisy. In general, Garapan might tend to be noisier because if there is going to be any noise, it would probably be nightlife um, as a result of tourism. But these days, I don't think it's an issue. People have commented that these days, driving around Garapan at night, it's almost like a ghost town. So not as vibrant. Tourism is down, as I've mentioned on this channel several times. So I don't think noise of that nature in Garapan would be an issue. The um, overall on the island, I think the most noise that I would encounter might be people who are overly fond of karaoke, who on weekends might spend hours singing, might be bush cutters, and might be dogs barking or roosters. But other than that, it's not a noisy island, and like it might have been back in the early 2000s. Good questions. But hey, here's an idea. As I've advised several of my clients, if you find an apartment that you are considering, then you should come back at night on a Friday night or on a Saturday night and drive through that same neighborhood and assess if it's noisy. If people are going to do karaoke, they're probably going to do it on a Friday night or a Saturday night. If there's going to be loud partying, then that's also going to happen on the weekend and in the evenings. So one of the strategies that I suggest, as I share one of my secrets, is to go back to that neighborhood in the evening and listen carefully to what things are like. All right. Okay. All right. Thanks for being mindful of the typos, Mr. Lundgren. That's one of my pet peeves. And just on a tangent, I don't know if I'm the only one who's noticed that the the quality of the written and spoken English language, for those of us who are fanatics about those things, is quite appalling. If you can't read a single comment on a under a YouTube channel these days and not see people pluralizing words using apostrophes, people not knowing what the past participle is. They'll say things like "I should have went to the supermarket." If you want to hear one of my rants about the grammar situation, check out my Walt Goodridge YouTube channel. That's where I do my rants over there. But it's people are using the word literally, like it's going out of style, and they're all using it wrong. And but I won't get into that too much here because I could go on for hours and hours. But just let me know if you've also noticed the large scale deterioration of the English language, and more importantly, what are we going to do about it? Okay, but that's I digress. All right. Next question from Stop Doing That. Should we be concerned about the growing presence of military buildup? I see they're looking to use the runways again after many years. Should you be concerned? Well, it depends what your concern is. The military buildup could make certain areas off limits. Right now, for example, everything north of the airport on Tinian is actually a military lease area. So even though it's open to the public, there could be and have been situations in the past where access has been blocked. And all of the sites, or 90% of the sites that I show people on Tinian, are in that military lease area. So if for some reason the military buildup results in that area being restricted, then yes, it could affect the quality of life in terms of access to certain historical landmarks. Um, but on the plus side, if the buildup results in hundreds or thousands of people relocating to the island, then that could actually be a good thing because, as I mentioned in a previous live stream, we used to have tourism and the garment industries supporting the island. And at one point, from what I've read, the garment industry alone was bringing in close to $1 billion of revenue in BGRT, um, business gross revenue tax. And now the garment factories are closed, so now it's only tourism. So the only, from what I see, one of the requirements for boosting the economy would be if there were some way that we could replicate that influx of bodies on the island. We had 20,000 extra workers here, girls from China and Thailand working in the garment industry, and that boosted the economy. You had people looking for housing, you had people shopping in the stores, and people buying clothes and food. So that was a major boost to the economy. Absent that sort of influx, then it's going to be difficult for an industry, for the economy to really bounce back to the same level that it did during the garment industry years. So a military buildup could actually be a good thing if it results in thousands of people relocating to the island. Now, should you be worried? You'll have to be more specific in terms of what it is you're worried about. Um, all right, and I'll answer that question. Okay, do people ever bring over a 10, 20, or even a 40-foot shipping container? Yes, there are companies, many of the supermarkets, and often you'll find that different companies will combine their orders so that they can fill a 10 or 20 or 40-foot container. I don't know the process by which an individual would do that, but you could contact Matson and find out. But you may also just want to, depending on what it is you're thinking of bringing in, you may want to contact one of the larger stores here, for example, and ask them if if you could put an order in for their container shipment. I have no idea how that works or if it's even possible or doable, but it seems like it might be, since I know that there are times when different companies will combine their orders so that they can fill a container. But yes, container Shipments are a thing here. We do have a port here on Saipan, and there are shipments coming in every few weeks, every few months. So the answer to your question is yes. So next question. I heartily dislike leases because no landlord has ever wanted me to leave. So it can only tie me down. If a chain smoker moves in next door, can I get a low-cost studio apartment without a lease? Can I get a low-cost studio apartment without a lease? I am sure you could, but here's the thing. If you get a an apartment, let's say a studio apartment in an apartment complex, and if the utilities are not included in the rent, then you'll need to show a lease to the local utility company, the Commonwealth Utilities Corporation, in order to get your service. There might be other ways. Maybe they'll a letter from the landlord will suffice, but typically you need to show a lease in order to get your service. So that's one. So you'll probably want to sign a lease. Now, you don't have to sign a 1 year lease. Right now, don't tell anyone I said this, but it's probably a renter's market here. So you can probably get a 6 month lease, a 3 month lease, um, without committing to something longer, for a longer term than you're comfortable with. So you do have that flexibility, and I've done that in the past where I've negotiated my my monthly rent by paying in advance, for example. So I'll say, okay, the rent is $700. What if I pay you 6 months in advance? Can we drop it to 600 or something like that? And that can often work as well. Um, so can you get a lease? Can you get an apartment without a lease? I'm sure you can, but there might be some advantages to having the lease, even beyond getting the utility service. All right. Guess sometimes getting your ID, your local ID, you might have to show proof of residence, getting your utilities, like I said. So you might actually want to lease, and it also obligates the landlord as well to provide certain services. But to answer your question, everything is possible. If you find someone who's amenable to it, and you prove yourself of good character, then I'm sure any deal can be negotiated to your satisfaction. All right, that's been my experience. People aren't as rigid uh, in their mindsets and worldviews as they might be in the States. Okay, so hopefully that's encouraging. All right. Um, yeah, the smoking is an issue as well. That's one of the reasons I also don't like signing up to um, to a lease, is because you might live there for a few days and then realize that your next door neighbor is a chain smoker. So best way, I simply ask when I'm looking at apartments, I'll ask the person showing me the apartment, who lives next door? Does he smoke? Does she smoke? Does he have a dog? Does she do karaoke every night? So I ask about the neighborhood, ask about the neighbors before I sign a lease. And I know I've done that. That's one of the first questions I ask. Does my neighbor smoke? um, before I sign a lease. So month to month, yes, you can get a month to month lease as well, I'm sure. Again, you might have to pay a deposit and um, prove yourself of good character. One of the advantages is that most people who are coming from the mainland, one of the things I've noticed is that some of the requirements tend to be a little less here. So whereas you might have to jump through hoops on the mainland to show tax history and income history and bank accounts and that sort of thing. Here, maybe not so much. Maybe some of the bigger places, yes, but in general, again, the things aren't as strict as they are and as rigid as they are on the mainland. And again, that's just a personality quirk. Maybe it's something to do with the Pacific Island culture in general, or just life on an island. But things tend to be a little more easygoing here. From I've found, maybe your experience might be different, but I've found things to be quite easy to get through. So I don't want to make this too painful for everybody, but I've enjoyed this session. I thank you guys for all the questions you've asked. Let's see if I left anything out here. All right. So we mentioned the property taxes. We mentioned AAA. We talked about unadvertised living quarters. All right. So I'll end on this note. Please ask a question. If you think I've overlooked a question, I'm flipping through them now. I think I've caught most all of the questions, but if there's something else you'd like to ask, feel free to go ahead and do that while I wrap things up. Those of you may not know that it is well known that the aviator Amelia Earhart ended up on Saipan. And yes, people will dispute this, and yes, people will say, no, that's just a theory. But people here in the Marshall Islands, people here on Saipan, people here on this side of the world have been telling a different story about the Amelia Earhart disappearance since July 2nd, 1937. And as a result, if you look up the History Channel, if you look up the 70s TV show, In Search Of, that starred Leonard Nimoy, you will find that everyone who has done a diligent search for Amelia has ended up on Saipan. And there are stories that abound told by locals, told by military personnel after the Battle of Saipan, told by researchers over the years that seem to corroborate that she was here. No hard physical evidence yet, but seems to corroborate the fact that she was here, or the belief that she was here, and that the plane, the Lockheed Electra, was actually destroyed here on Saipan by the U.S. military shortly after the Battle of Saipan. So I mention that to say this: I will bet you, and if I'm wrong, you play this video for me again, and I will eat my words. But if you read any account of people believing that they will find Amelia Earhart's plane at the bottom of the ocean near Nikamura Island, tell them that Walt Goodridge on Saipan told them that it will not turn out to be a plane. All right. So I know there's a news report that's been going around recently that radar and sonar have detected what appears to be the Lockheed Electra at the bottom of the ocean somewhere other than Saipan. And I'm not confident that it will prove to be the Lockheed Electra. So okay, stop doing that. Just made a snarky remark, but I'm not going to repeat that here. For those of you who are watching the replay, you guys can read that for yourself about Amelia Earhart. Okay, but I will say this: stop doing that. Most of the blame is actually being placed. The blame for the flight not ending up where it should have been was being blamed on Fred Noonan, her navigator, not Amelia herself. So that's something to keep in mind. All right, and I'm going to end with just one last question. Is an iPhone compatible with the service providers? Absolutely, absolutely. People here do have iPhones. People here use Androids. I mentioned before, however, that there are only two service providers. I'm not sure if Starlink is available here. Since it's satellite-based, maybe it is, but I'm not familiar with Starlink. But there are two phone companies that can provide cell phone service for you here, as well as Wi-Fi. I'm not going to mention their names, but one of them allows you to use your phone as a hotspot, and one of them doesn't. So very important if you're here on the island already and you're making the decision which one to go with. And if that's something that's important to you, for example, I use my smartphone as a hotspot. So having that functionality activated is important to me. So I went with the company that provided that service. So about your iPhone question, yes, it is. And on that note, at 9:58, exactly 2 minutes before the 1 hour mark, I enjoyed your broadcast. Thank you for the great info. You're quite welcome. I hope that's been helpful to anyone. If you'd like more information, if you'd like to set up a consultation, if you'd like to set up a reconnaissance tour or a relocation tour, you can go to discoversaipan.com/relocation and you can fill out a request form and I can send you the rates for the consultations and the tours. If you're interested in looking at some of the forms that one uses to get your ID and other things as well, I do have something called a relocation fast track kit. You can see that in the store. That's part of the channel. And you can also visit saipanliving.com. And I have other books about the island as well. And I'll just take these last few minutes to do a little pitch. I do have some books here. One is called There's Something About Saipan, a visitor's guide to fantastic facts, tantalizing trivia, startling statistics, dramatic diaries, and a hair-raising history from America's most colorful island territories. So that's a lot of information that I share on my tours. There's this Chicken Feathers and Garlic Skin, Diary of a Chinese Garment Factory Girl on Saipan. If you want to see what life was like and how the garment factories were set up here on Saipan during the 80s, and the last one closed 2009. You can get that book. This has been used in college courses in the mainland and also in a textbook in France about the American dream. But this has been used in 3 college courses in the mainland, women's studies courses, as well as textiles courses. And this was co-authored by Chun Yu Wang and myself. And then there's this one, Jamaican on Saipan, my first few months on the island and moving from the States to here on Saipan. And yes, I've got pictures as well. And usually I give this out. This is just a little pamphlet. This is Amelia Earhart on Saipan. So some of the spots that I include on my tours that are pertinent to the Amelia Earhart's presence here on the island. And then there's, of course, the Saipan Living Relocation Guide that you can get on Amazon here in the store as well. And then finally, years ago, I had a chance to give a tour to a fellow who was on the USS North Carolina, Lloyd Glick. He came here on his 90th birthday, and I gave him a tour of both Guam and Saipan. And during the course of our interaction in the months preceding the tour, he shared with me his experience being moved by the Pearl Harbor invasion and then signing up for the military at age 17, I think it was. And during the course of preparing for his tour, he sent me a lot of information, sent me some of his journal references, and I put a book together for him that I surprised him with when he actually came on the island. And so that's Bugle Boy and Battleship, and Lloyd unfortunately passed away just last year. But so that's this as well. And if you'd like more information, again, you can check out discoversaipan.com. Thank you guys for participating. And yep, I think I've gotten the hang of doing the live streams now. So I worked out most of the glitches and we should be smooth sailing as well. So we might do this every week based on our response and the feedback today. I'm really encouraged, and we'll probably do this next week as every Sunday at this time. Here on Saipan, it's now 10 o'clock, a little bit after 10 on Sunday, November 9th. And where you are stateside, it's probably Saturday evening somewhere. But thanks again for participating. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for the support. If any of you want to test out the super chat feature and donate a little something, if this has been helpful, feel free to do that. I'd like to see how that works. And with that said, thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next live stream.